I never imagined that a simple camping trip, meant to be a peaceful retreat from the pressures of everyday life, could unravel the very fabric of our marriage. The mountain air was sharp and invigorating, filling my lungs with a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. Above us, the stars shimmered with a quiet brilliance, standing as silent witnesses to our laughter, our shared moments, and the comforting warmth of the campfire that flickered between us. Everything about that night seemed perfect, almost sacred, as if the universe itself had conspired to give us a fleeting glimpse of something pure, something eternal. But as the night wore on, as the shadows of the forest deepened around us, so too did the creeping shadows of doubt in my heart. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. If you find this content useful, don't forget to watch the whole video, like, subscribe, and share with someone you think needs to hear this too. Mark, my husband of over 3 decades, whom I had trusted with my entire being, suddenly suggested something I never could have anticipated. A reckless, daring proposition that shook the foundation of everything I thought I knew about us. With the fire dwindling to mere embers, its glow casting eerie, dancing shadows on his face, he casually suggested we swap tents for the night. It was meant to be a joke, a playful idea that seemed harmless in the moment. But that single, seemingly innocent suggestion would set off a chain of events that would blur the lines between what was right and what was wrong, between love and temptation, in a way I could never have imagined. As I lay there in the cold quiet of the night, the stars above indifferent to my turmoil, I could feel the weight of his words pressing against me, pulling me in, and suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my marriage felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. The space between us, once so familiar, now felt like a chasm, and I was unsure which way to turn. The dawn is breaking now, a new day creeping in, and with it, the realization that I'm standing on the edge of a choice that could either heal the wounds that have festered in silence or destroy everything we've built together. What will I do when the truth emerges, raw and unfiltered? And, perhaps more hauntingly, what will become of us once it does? The mountain air was sharply crisp, carrying with it the fresh scent of pine trees and the faint, haunting echo of a distant owl's call that seemed to stretch out into the vast, darkened woods. I stood at the edge of the lake, the cool evening breeze rustling through the tall grasses, my gaze fixed on the water before me. It was like a mirror, reflecting the stars above, tiny, flickering lights that danced across the surface, their shimmer hauntingly beautiful, like forgotten fragments of memories I couldn't quite place. My name is Anna, and at 53, life with Mark had fallen into a rhythm so predictable that it felt as though the days had been stitched together into a fabric I knew all too well, each thread worn with time. But here, in this wild, untouched wilderness, there was a whisper in my heart, a quiet, desperate hope for something more, something different, something I couldn't yet name. Mark, always the center of attention, the life of any gathering, had been the one to suggest this camping trip with his friends, Tom and Dave. I had agreed, not only because of the promise of adventure, but with a silent yearning that perhaps this change of scenery could breathe some fresh air into a relationship that had long since settled into comfortable complacency. The day had been filled with the simple, grounding joys of nature, fishing beneath a sky that gradually deepened into a blanket of blue, laughter that echoed through the trees, and the warmth of the campfire that crackled and popped in the growing dusk. The scent of wood smoke curled around us, mixing with the sharp, clean air of the mountain. But as night fell and the sky above us bloomed with stars, cold, distant, almost indifferent to our small, fleeting presence, the day's simplicity began to lose its luster. Mark, ever the enthusiast, had packed along his favorite whiskey, as though no evening could be complete without it. As the hours passed, the bottles slowly emptied, and with each drink, his laughter grew louder, more boisterous, filling the night with an energy that felt almost desperate. His stories, usually charming and full of the mischief of youth, began to spill out with increasing animation, his words slurring slightly as he tried to keep the mood light, to keep the air buzzing with the thrill of shared memories. I watched him from my seat by the fire, his silhouette outlined against the flickering flames, his face warm in the firelight, but his eyes, just for a moment, distant, as if searching for something he couldn't quite reach. Tom and Dave, equally affected by the alcohol, joined in with their own tales, their laughter ringing through the stillness of the night like echoes from a distant past, an almost surreal soundtrack to the memories we were all trying in vain to relive. But as the firelight began to fade, so did the warmth of the evening, and a deep, unspoken silence settled over me. It was as though the wilderness itself had begun to pull us into its depths, wrapping us in a quiet that felt heavier than it should have been, full of the weight of things left unsaid and forgotten. I couldn't help but wonder, was this the life we had built? Was this the passion that had once been so alive between us, now reduced to hollow laughter and stories retold for the 100th time? Or was it something more that we had forgotten to search for, something that could still ignite the spark between us? The stars above, so cold, so distant, seemed to watch over us, indifferent, as if they too were waiting for an answer. As the fire gradually dimmed, its once brilliant flames now reduced to a bed of glowing embers, Mark, in his usual whimsical way, suggested we all sleep under the open sky. It was a romantic notion, one that seemed to perfectly match the tranquil mood of the night. The stars hung like diamonds against the vast, velvet expanse above, and the cool night air wrapped itself around us like a soft blanket. Yet, in his slightly inebriated state, Mark's mind wandered beyond mere stargazing. With a mischievous grin, he proposed something far more unconventional: to swap tents for the night. His voice slurred slightly as he added, "Let's make this night unforgettable." It was a bold, adventurous suggestion, and though it had an undeniable appeal, I found myself hesitating. The idea was exciting, but it carried a certain weight, a tension that stirred both curiosity and unease in me. As the fire crackled, sending sparks into the night, we lingered in its warmth, sharing stories from years past. The flickering shadows danced across our faces, accentuating the laughter and camaraderie between us. Mark, now thoroughly tipsy, raised his glass with a wide, unsteady grin and declared, "A toast to old friends." His laughter was infectious, a deep, hearty sound that made the air feel lighter. But his coordination was another matter. With a stumble and a hiccup, he lost his footing and spilled his drink, sending a splash of alcohol onto the dirt. Tom, ever the steady one, let out a quiet sigh, his voice gentle yet firm. "Maybe it's time for you to get some rest, Mark," he said, guiding him away from the fire. Mark, not one to back down from a challenge, decided that the best way to recover would be to sleep in Tom's tent, declaring it would be just like the old days. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of them reliving those carefree moments, even as Mark staggered off, leaning heavily on Tom for support. This left me with Dave, who had been quietly sipping his drink, his gaze soft and thoughtful. The air was growing colder by the minute, and as the warmth of the fire faded, the idea of spending the night outside became less and less appealing. I shivered involuntarily, glancing up at the dark sky, feeling a rising discomfort at the thought of facing the chill alone. Sensing my hesitation, Dave turned to me with a reassuring smile. "No sense in you freezing out here, Anna," he said, his voice warm and steady, as though his offer was a simple solution to an obvious problem. The kindness in his tone made me pause, but as I considered my options, I couldn't help but feel a swirl of conflicting emotions. The cold nipped at my skin, urging me to accept, yet the thought of sharing a tent with Dave brought a mix of excitement and unease. Mark's earlier suggestion had already stirred something deep inside me, an unfamiliar flutter in my chest. The idea of closeness, of vulnerability, seemed all too real in the stillness of the night. And yet, there was something undeniably comforting about Dave's presence, a steadiness I couldn't deny, but the emotional complexity of it all left me uncertain. Would sharing a tent with him feel right, or would it complicate things in ways I wasn't yet ready to face? "Dave," I said softly, my voice barely more than a breath carried by the night's chill. It felt strange, almost too vulnerable to speak in such a quiet, exposed way, but I knew I had to respond. "I really appreciate the offer, but I think I'll manage on my own tonight." My words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain, as I tried to muster the courage to maintain some distance, both physically and emotionally. He paused, his eyes reflecting understanding, a depth of empathy that made my chest tighten with something I couldn't quite name. "All right, Anna," he said, his voice steady and calm, the kind of voice that made everything seem less complicated, even when it wasn't. "But if you change your mind, you know where to find me." And with that, without another word, Dave turned and walked toward his tent. His movements slow and deliberate, as though he, too, had felt the weight of the moment and didn't want to rush away from it. As he disappeared into the darkness, I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, the cold creeping into my bones despite the layers. The fire, which had once been a brilliant source of warmth and light, was now reduced to nothing more than a bed of dying embers, its warmth slipping away like the final traces of daylight. The night felt endless, and the silence that followed was almost suffocating, its weight pressing down on me with an intensity that made my heart beat just a little faster. I could hear the soft rustling of leaves in the distance, a sound so faint it seemed almost imagined, and the occasional hoot of an owl, each noise echoing in the stillness, amplifying the loneliness that surrounded me. The world felt so vast, so empty, as though the night had swallowed everything whole. I stood there for a moment, caught between the pull of the cold and the pull of my own thoughts. The idea of sharing a tent with Dave had felt like a reasonable offer, but now, in the stark quiet of the wilderness, it felt more complicated. There was something inherently awkward about it, the propriety of sharing a small space with another man, even a close friend. The chill gnawed at my skin, but my mind kept circling back to the uncertainty of what it would mean, what it could lead to. Yet, the longer I stood there in the cold, the more appealing the warmth of his tent became. I had already turned down the offer, but the bite of the mountain air made the temptation all the more potent. Finally, I gave in, though it felt like a reluctant surrender. I found my way to Dave's tent, the fabric warm against the night's sharp edge. I thanked him quietly as I settled into my sleeping bag, my movements careful, measured, trying to maintain some semblance of distance, of control. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my breath, the way the night seemed to deepen around us as we lay there, the silence of the mountains wrapping us both in a stillness so profound it felt almost sacred. Yet, despite the outward calm, something inside me stirred uneasily, a quiet tension that refused to be ignored. I was just beginning to drift off, the edges of sleep pulling me into a soft haze, when I felt something pressing against my back. My body stiffened, heart racing instantly. The world around me seemed to snap back into focus, and my mind scrambled to make sense of the sensation. Was it an animal, perhaps a wayward rock, or the edge of my sleeping bag? But no, it was something far more human. The pressure against me was unmistakable, and in that moment, a wave of realization crashed over me. It was Dave, his body close enough that I could feel his warmth, but there was something else, something undeniable. He was aroused. My mind raced as memories flooded back to me. The last time Mark and I had been intimate months ago. The loneliness I had felt then, the aching, almost desperate desire for touch, it all came rushing back with a force I hadn't expected. My pulse quickened, and Dave's warm breath brushed against the back of my neck, sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. The reality of the situation settled over me like a heavy cloak, and in that fragile, uncertain moment, something deep inside me shifted. I had no answers, no clear path forward, but I made a choice I never thought I would make. It felt like crossing a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, but in the midst of it all, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if I let myself lean into it, just this once. I turned to face him, the dim light casting shadows on his features, but his eyes were unmistakable, an intense, silent question in their depths. Our gazes locked, and in that moment, everything else seemed to blur into the background. The night around us, once filled with the soft rustling of leaves and distant hoots of owls, fell into a heavy stillness. My heart was hammering in my chest, not just from the biting cold that had begun to creep beneath my layers, but from something far more raw, far more dangerous. There was an unspoken tension between us, thickening the air like smoke, and as I nodded, the simple act felt like the breaking of a dam. I could feel the rush of emotions, desire, fear, guilt, flooding me all at once, overwhelming in its intensity. "I need this," I whispered, my voice barely audible, trembling as the words left my lips. The confession felt almost as if I were admitting to something far greater than I could understand. My voice faltered under the weight of everything it represented. My longing, my loneliness, the forbidden nature of what I was about to allow. Desire twisted in my stomach, hot and urgent, but there was also a sharp pang of guilt, a deep ache in the pit of my heart that told me this was not something I should want, not something I should do. Dave didn't speak immediately. His gaze softened, but his hand, trembling ever so slightly, reached out toward me. His fingers brushed gently against my cheek, and in that touch, there was an undeniable current, an electric connection that sent a shiver of warmth spreading across my skin. It was as if the air around us crackled with unspoken words, and with that simple contact, my body responded. Leaning into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut as I tried to grasp onto the fleeting sense of warmth he offered. The small space of the tent felt suddenly suffocating, our bodies so close that I could feel every shift of movement, every rise and fall of breath. The intimacy between us was palpable, filling the space with something that could no longer be ignored. It was as if everything had led to this moment, this fragile, dangerous crossing of a line that neither of us could see but both knew was there. His fingers trailed down the curve of my neck, light but deliberate, sending a ripple of sensation through me. "I've always admired you, Anna," he murmured, his voice low, gravelly with emotion. The words hung in the air like an unspoken promise, fragile and intimate. I could hear the weight of them, feel the vulnerability in his tone, and somehow that confession broke through something inside me. It was a soft admission, one that made my pulse race, but it also sent a ripple of heat spreading through my chest, igniting something deep within me that I couldn't name. His voice, barely more than a breath, was a subtle confession, one that felt as if it had been waiting in the wings, lingering in the space between us for far longer than either of us had dared to acknowledge. And then, as if the floodgates had opened, I felt a rush of something forbidden, a wild, thrilling surge of feeling as our lips met. At first, it was slow, hesitant, a tentative exploration, as if neither of us fully believed the other would follow through. But soon, the kiss deepened, fueled by the isolation of the wilderness, by the undeniable tension between us, and by a raw need for connection. My body responded before my mind could protest, my heart racing in my chest. But even as the kiss grew more urgent, more consuming, a part of me knew this was wrong. I knew the consequences of giving in to this moment, but the thought of returning to the cold, empty silence of the night without this, without something real, was unbearable. As we moved, my breath catching in my throat, I turned slightly, heart hammering, as if trying to escape the cage of my ribcage. Dave's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw a reflection of the same emotions that twisted inside me. Surprise, desire, and something else, something deeper. There was a conflict in those eyes, a struggle I recognized all too well. He whispered my name, a sound thick with both apology and longing, and in that single word, I felt the weight of everything unspoken between us. The moment was fragile, so fragile that any word, any hesitation, could shatter it entirely, and I knew deep down that neither of us was ready for that. We didn't need words. Words would only break the spell, make it real in a way we weren't prepared to face. Instead, I moved closer, feeling the heat of his body through the layers of our sleeping bags. The air around us was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest, makes your breath catch and your skin tingle with awareness. There was no going back now. In that moment, everything we had ever shared, every silent glance, every unspoken connection, had led us here, into the heart of the night, into a place neither of us could escape. The weight of the air was palpable, thick with everything we had been holding back, and as I closed the space between us, I knew without a doubt that the night had changed everything. Dave's hand found mine in the dim glow of the tent. His touch tentative at first, as if testing the waters, but there was a quiet urgency to it, a desire that mirrored my own. His fingers traced the delicate lines of my palm, and each stroke sent an electric shiver racing up my arm, leaving a trail of warmth in its wake. The contact was light, almost hesitant, but with each passing second, the hesitation melted away, and his grip grew bolder. I didn't pull away, and in that small gesture, something shifted between us, an unspoken understanding, a silent agreement. His breath was warm against the back of my neck, so close I could feel the heat of it, but his lips remained just out of reach. My pulse quickened, my heart hammering in my chest as I felt the weight of the moment settle over me. The decision was mine, this delicate, fragile crossroads of desire and duty, the choice to lean in or pull away. I knew what I should do, what was expected of me: responsibility, restraint, caution. But in the dim, intimate light of the tent, with the stars above us offering their silent witness, the pull toward something forbidden, something dangerous, felt almost magnetic. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to bring us to this precipice. And now there was no turning back. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, his lips brushed against mine. It was a soft, questioning kiss, the kind that doesn't demand but instead asks if it's okay to cross that invisible line. It was gentle, tender, almost fragile, like the first step into uncharted territory. I could feel the weight of everything in that moment, the closeness between us, the electric tension that had been building in the air since the first brush of his hand against mine. This kiss was a whisper of what could be, a quiet declaration of what we both wanted but knew we shouldn't, what we couldn't allow ourselves to have. Still, as the kiss deepened, I felt myself slipping, slowly, inexorably, into the storm of emotions that had been brewing inside me for far too long. The boundaries that had once seemed so clear began to blur in the heat of the moment, fading into the background as I allowed myself to drown in the sensation of him, in the warmth and the longing that seemed to surge between us. My mind raced, torn between desire and the gnawing voice of reason that whispered warnings in the back of my head. I pulled back slightly, just enough to catch my breath, but my heart was still racing, my pulse erratic, as if I were caught in a storm I couldn't escape. "Dave, we can't," I murmured, my voice barely audible, trembling with the weight of what I was saying. I knew the words were a plea, a desperate attempt to hold on to something familiar, something safe, but they sounded so small, so insignificant against the growing tide of emotions between us. My chest felt tight, constricted by the uncertainty and the fear of what would happen if we didn't stop now. He nodded, his expression softening, but the longing in his eyes didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, a quiet ache that mirrored my own. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, the words laced with something raw and unspoken. "But for just this moment, can we pretend?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread, the invitation to slip away from the rules, to let go of everything that had held us back. The tent, so small and enclosing, felt like a cocoon, isolating us from the world outside, from the consequences and the realities that awaited us once we left this fragile bubble of intimacy. I could feel the weight of the outside world pressing in on me. Society's expectations, the judgments of others, the responsibility I had to my own morals. But in this moment, inside this tiny space, all of that seemed so far away. I wanted to say no, to pull back, to stop this before it went any further. I wanted to hold on to the parts of myself that still made sense, to maintain control and distance. But the loneliness, the aching void that had been gnawing at me for so long, the desperate yearning for connection that had been lying dormant in my chest, it was all too much. The pull of his touch, the depth of what was unspoken between us, was stronger than the voice of reason. Instead of pulling away, I found myself leaning in, the need for warmth, for comfort, for something real, becoming the force that propelled me forward. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, to the desire that was no longer something to be denied. For once I let go. As I responded, I leaned in once more, our lips meeting in a fervent kiss that seemed to release years of pent-up longing. It was as though every suppressed emotion, every unspoken desire, flooded to the surface in that single moment. His hands found their way to my waist, pulling me toward him with a force that made my heart race, and I couldn't help but feel the world outside our small tent fade away, slipping into the shadows of oblivion. There was only the heat between us, the raw energy, the undeniable pull of something we had both been fighting for far too long. Yet even as I hesitated, questioning every part of this choice, the decision had already been made. It lingered in the silence, in the stillness of the night that enveloped us, in the quiet space between breaths. It was a decision made not in words, but in the dark corners of my soul, under the indifferent gaze of countless stars. I surrendered to it, to the yearning that had been building inside me, to the need for someone other than the life I had known. In that fleeting, fragile moment, I gave in completely. Dave's touch was gentle at first, tentative, as though he was unsure of how far to go, what boundaries to test. His fingers brushed against my skin like whispers, asking for permission, and I found myself responding instinctively, pulling him closer. Slowly, as if sensing my consent, his hands became bolder, more sure, more confident. The initial hesitation gave way to something more urgent, more desperate, and I could feel the very foundation of who I was beginning to shift under the weight of what was happening. Was this a betrayal? A moment of weakness, of reckless abandon, or perhaps, in some twisted way, it was an act of strength, a reclamation of something I had lost? The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as the intensity of our connection deepened. In that cocoon of warmth, of stolen moments, the world outside the tent ceased to exist. Nothing mattered except the rhythm of our movements, the warmth of our bodies pressed together, and the thrill of the forbidden. The very act itself was charged with an electric sense of danger, of something that should never have been, yet felt so right. It was exhilarating and terrifying, all at once, and when the act finally ended, we lay there in the silence, the aftermath settling like a heavy weight between us. The cool mountain air crept in through the thin fabric of the tent, stealing the warmth from our entwined bodies, and suddenly, the intimacy we had shared seemed so fragile, so fleeting. As I lay there, I felt a turmoil of emotions welling up inside me. Guilt, sharp and biting. Satisfaction, deep and overwhelming. Confusion like a cloud hanging in my mind, and beneath it all, a strange, unexpected sense of liberation. It was as though something inside me had been released, untethered from the constraints I had placed on it for so long. Dave's breathing beside me was slow and steady, a contrast to the storm that raged inside my chest. His presence was both comforting and a brutal reminder of what had just occurred, of what I had allowed to happen. I turned to face him, my eyes tracing the outline of his features in the dim light. His face, so peaceful in sleep, held no hint of the intensity that had just unfolded between us. For a moment, I wondered how we would face tomorrow, how we would face each other in the cold light of day. What would happen when the morning came? How would I ever look at Mark again without the weight of this night crushing me? The night had changed something inside me, something I couldn't deny, something I couldn't undo. I knew that when dawn broke, the person who emerged from that tent would not be the same Anna who had entered it. The intimacy with Dave, though fleeting and fragile, had ignited something deep inside me, a longing for something more, something beyond the mundane routine I had settled into with Mark. It was a desire for more than what I had, a hunger for connection that I hadn't realized was so profound. As I lay there, the full weight of my actions pressed heavily on my chest. I couldn't escape the thoughts that tormented me. Would Mark notice the change in me? Would he sense the shift in my soul? Could he ever forgive me if he discovered the truth? And what of Dave? What would become of us? Could we ever look at each other without the ghosts of this night hanging between us, forever altering the way we saw one another? I found myself lost in thought, replaying the years I had spent with Mark, those years that had once been filled with the warmth of affection and the steady rhythm of shared moments. I thought about the comfort we had built together, the predictability of our life, and the love that had once burned bright, but over time had slowly dimmed to a quiet ember. It wasn't a bad life, not at all. It was steady, reliable. But now, as I lay there, I couldn't ignore the undeniable truth that it had become more of a routine, a habit, than a true connection. And then there was tonight, this moment with Dave. It was everything Mark and I hadn't been for a long time. It was raw, unfiltered, impulsive, and completely selfish. Every touch, every kiss, was a sharp contrast to the life I had left behind, a reckless abandon that set my soul on fire. And yet, amid the chaos of desire, there was something profoundly terrifying about it. It was as if I had stepped into a world that existed outside the boundaries of my known reality, a world where nothing was guaranteed, where every decision felt weighty, irreversible. The stars outside the tent continued their indifferent watch, cold and distant, unaware of the emotional tempest that raged within me. And then it hit me. This night was more than just a fleeting, passionate escape. It was a turning point. The magnitude of what had just happened began to settle in, and with it came the realization that I would have to make a choice. I could no longer live in the gray area between my past with Mark and the secret I had just shared with Dave. Would I come clean to Mark, expose the truth and seek his forgiveness, even if I knew it would destroy everything we had built? Or would I bury this moment deep inside me, keep it locked away, allowing it to fester and rot, as it inevitably would until it consumed me? Morning arrived far too soon, its harsh light slicing through the tent fabric, as though the universe itself was forcing me to face the cold truth of what had transpired. Dave was already awake, up and moving, his back turned to me, perhaps lost in his own thoughts, his own regrets, or perhaps he was simply trying to distance himself from the intensity of what had happened. I quickly dressed, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the buttons of my clothes, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Guilt churned in my stomach like a heavy stone, confusion clouded my thoughts, and yet, beneath it all, was an unfamiliar sense of liberation, as though I had been freed from something I couldn't even name. Mark, in his usual obliviousness, was already up, his face a little drawn from the hike but still radiating that familiar, easygoing optimism. He was cheerful, talking about how he was already planning our next trip, unaware, of course, of the seismic shift that had occurred overnight. As we packed up our gear, I couldn't bring myself to look Dave in the eye. The weight of what we had shared pressed heavily between us, an invisible barrier that neither of us dared to breach. The drive back was eerily silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Mark, ever the optimist, kept the conversation going, his voice a comforting, steady cadence, talking about the stars and how he hoped the next trip would be just as enlightening. I fought the urge to scream, knowing that for me, the stars would never look the same again. I forced a smile, my voice steady but my heart pounding in my chest, betraying the calm I desperately tried to project. It was enlightening, I said, the words tasting bitter on my tongue, like ash that refused to leave my mouth. The landscape blurred outside the car window, miles of road stretching before us, taking us further and further away from the mountain, but never truly distancing me from the haunting memory of what had happened. I could feel Dave's eyes on me, a glance here and there, silent acknowledgements passing between us like a secret language only the two of us understood. It was a bond now forged in the shadows, a connection that neither of us could ever erase. At home, the familiar motions of unpacking seemed almost surreal. Mark, content and unaware, hummed in the kitchen, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I watched him, his movements fluid and easy, but everything about him felt foreign now, tainted by the knowledge of what I had done. The mundane tasks we had once shared so casually now felt charged with an unbearable weight. The moment felt frozen in time, the silence between us stretching uncomfortably. I couldn't shake the nagging sense that something had irrevocably shifted within me, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. That evening, as Mark prepared dinner, I sat at the kitchen table, my thoughts a tornado of guilt, fear, and confusion. I could feel the decision hanging over me like a storm cloud, dark and ominous, suffocating me with its presence. I knew I had to speak, to confront the truth, but the words felt like lead in my mouth. I could barely bring myself to look at Mark, yet I knew I had to. "Mark," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, hoarse with the weight of what I was about to say, "there's something I need to tell you about last night." He turned slowly, spatula still in hand, a faint furrow appearing between his brows as he sensed the change in the air. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly from light-hearted indifference to something more alert, more concerned. The warmth of the kitchen, the rhythmic hum of the stove, and the familiar sounds of our life together seemed to fade as he locked eyes with me. His voice soft but edged with apprehension. "What's wrong, Anna?" His words were gentle, but there was an underlying urgency to them, a sense that something was amiss. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, my chest tightening as my heart began to race. The question hung in the air, innocently spoken, but with the gravity of 1,000 unspoken things. I took a shaky breath, the air thick and heavy in my lungs, as though every word I was about to speak carried the weight of 100 burdens. I could feel the tension coiling inside me, like a tight knot in my stomach that refused to loosen. The words I had been dreading for so long, the truth I had been running from, sat heavily on my tongue, each syllable like lead, impossible to swallow. "When you suggested swapping tents," I began, my voice faltering slightly, the words catching in my throat. It felt like I was choking on the confession, my pulse hammering in my ears as I tried to find the strength to continue. "Something happened with Dave." The words left my mouth tentative and raw, as though the mere act of saying them made them more real, more irreversible. It was unexpected. The moment the final word left my lips, Mark's face fell. His casual demeanor shattered in an instant. His eyes widened slightly. His body stilled as the weight of what I had said sank in, each syllable embedding itself into the space between us. For a long, painful moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with tension, the kitchen suddenly feeling suffocating, too small for the enormity of what I had just revealed. I watched him closely, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and then to something darker, something heavier. He was trying to process, trying to understand, but I could see the light in his eyes flicker, his thoughts racing. The warmth of the room no longer comforted me. Instead, it felt like a cruel reminder of how far we were from the life we had once known. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.